Well, good morning. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy, and we are beginning episode 67 this morning. Yesterday, we looked at the episode 66, and we looked at the question after 6 investigations, what have we learned? And we answered that question by stipulating that we have learned that the government will lie to us. And it's not because of the work of government agencies or investigative commissions or congressional hearings necessarily that we have learned so much of the truth about the JFK assassination. It's because of citizen journalists. It's because of JFK researchers. It's because of movie makers like Oliver Stone. It's because of people courageous enough to stand up against the defamation and the slander of the entrenched powers that want to preserve the narrative. They are the reason that we have moved the ball. And I say we, it's a big team. And I did not, when I listed out uh, the names that I listed, it was never intended to be a conclusive list or an all encompassing list. It was just a sampling. So some of you in your comments were able to drop some more names of people. So if you want to go back and read some of the comments from yesterday's video, there are other names included that deserve their day in the sun as well. So it's because of the sacrifice of those people that we now stand on the cusp of knowing with a certainty what happened to JFK and why it happened. Um, I used a football analogy about advancing the ball, and each succeeding generation of JFK researchers, etc., have moved the ball down the field to the point where I believe we're now in the red zone. And uh, one of the comments yesterday was it would really be nice to, in order to score that touchdown, to achieve our final objective, to have whoever wins the presidency in 2024 to commit finally to releasing the rest of the documents that they've been holding back and holding back. It just seems like every time we get a commitment and then from the candidate, and once they become president, the CIA director comes over and prevails upon them not to release some more of these documents. And that's generally what happens. So, boy, that would really be uh, a neat thing for America to sort of come clean with its past if that would occur. Nevertheless, we still have residual resistance against that. So it's going to take somebody courageous to do that. Um, One of the other things I mentioned yesterday that seemed to get a lot of a little bit of a blowback was psychological warfare. And first, I don't mention that lightheartedly. It's not an offhand comment. It's documented in the church hearings. We found out a lot about the psychological weaponization of lies and the impact that it has. A lot of the study, the CIA research happened in Vietnam during Operation Phoenix, where they utilized psychological warfare there against the Vietnamese population. And then afterwards, they brought it home domestically. And it's documented. Okay, so I'm not making it up. It's a fancy way of saying lie, psychological warfare. And the way I defined it was you take, we all have this human need to be able to understand seemingly unexplainable or uncertain events. We need to understand it. We need to be able to comprehend it, make sense of it. That's just a human basic need. It's subconscious. We don't even realize it. And then we also need someone to blame if it, for it, or give credit for it, either way. And then some sort of outcome which satisfies us that vengeance has been attained, or justice, whichever. And what the government has figured out how to do, I don't want this to come off sounding like I'm anti-government. I'm not. It's just that it's the government that's always doing it in various forms. It's the CIA, that's part of the government. It's the FBI, that's part of the government. It's the White House, that's part of the government. It's Congress, that's part of the government. Uh, and you just go on and on and on. And trying to get to the bottom of these lies is not proof that someone like myself is anti-government. I would just like to know what is being done in my name. And I think I'm adult enough, and I think all of us are adult enough to handle the truth. And so when we are lied to, and our history is perverted, uh, it is as if they are treating us like children. We're not capable of handling the truth. Uh, we're not grown-ups. So this is not an anti-government site or channel or uh, series. I'm just reporting what we've learned. And in this reporting, unfortunately, we find that our government has been actively involved in lying to us. And not just in the past. Another thing I've noticed is that people will more readily accept the government lies of the past than they will of the current day. Uh, it's almost as if they're invested in the lies that are happening right now, and don't want to, it goes back to that saying again, it's easier to lie to somebody than it is to convince them they've been lied to. And so I sense that people are more willing to accept the government lied to us about the assassination of JFK, or that it lied to us about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, or that it lied to us about the assassination of Martin Luther King, or that it lied to us about the assassination of Malcolm X, or that it lied to us about the origins of the Vietnam War, or that it lied to us about the scope of the Vietnam War. And of course, the Pentagon Papers revealed multiplicity of lies related to Vietnam, or that it lied to us about Watergate, or that it lied to us. Well, you just about Iraq, even. And what you notice is there's always a precipitating event which causes uncertainty. And that's, in the JFK case, it was the killing of the president, and all the assassinations, it was the assassination itself, and all the questions that emanate from those, causing uncertainty, causing a little bit of panic, a little bit of what's going on. And then, Vietnam, the the war itself, what's going on, Watergate, the break-in, the political scandal that began to bubble out from that break-in. What's going on? Who can explain this? Uh, Iraq, the war in Iraq was a direct outcome, result of 9/11, which was the precipitating event, which caused a lot of people to panic, and the uncertainty, and what's going on. And if you fast forward to 2019, 2021, 22, even to this current day, some pretty significant things happened that had caused a lot of people to ask, what's going on? And, you know, I, and it opens a door of opportunity for the government to step into that vacuum and answer the question. And the danger is, if they've lied to us in the past and achieved a result that they wanted, that they'll repeat the pattern. And if we, the people, don't know the pattern, we don't recognize the lie or the signs or the traits of a lie, then we're susceptible to be lied to repeatedly over and over and over again. And you always look at the outcome and you see what came of that. You know, the JFK assassination, I sense that some people in this little community that we've created aren't going to be happy when we start talking about the reasons for the assassination, because it's going to implicate the government big time. And but I'm just going to present the facts and let the chips fall where they may. The desired outcome in the JFK case, they got largely what they wanted, which was the Vietnam War, right? Uh, Same thing with Bobby and MLK. They were the three loudest voices, actually the four loudest voices for peace during the Vietnam era, all were assassinated. It was JFK, Malcolm X, Bobby, and Martin Luther King. I think that should tell you something. All four of the loudest voices, most impactful voices, most influential voices. One was already a president. One was fixing to be president. One, J. Edgar Hoover feared would be our first black president. Of course, Malcolm X had his own following. These are influential people, all taken out to achieve a desired end. That was a psyop because we were lied to. They gave us, when we asked the question why and what, they said, oh, it was a lone gunman trying to get attention. It was a lone gunman who was a racist. It was a lone gunman who was mad about Palestinian Arab Israeli relations and Bobby Kennedy's stance on that. It was, we always got a lie with a convenient boogeyman or a patsy, but the outcome was they got their war. That's the danger of a psyop. If you fast forward to just Watergate, for example, the psyop was that Nixon was alone responsible for this. This was a political scandal only. That was the psyop. And of course, Nixon comes out looking like the boogeyman in that whole deal. And what we didn't realize and didn't learn until years later was that it was really a cover up of the JFK assassination. All the players that had gotten arrested at the Watergate and how they connected back to JFK assassination. So that's another thing we learn about all this is that lies beget more lies. They have to. The cover up has to be continued. The fallout has to be contained. And if you have to dribble out a little bit of truth, but to preserve the overall narrative, the CIA has already proven capable of limited hangouts here and there along the way, but the overall narrative stays the same. If you fast forward to the Iraq War, we now know Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. He was not offering training bases to Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden hadn't even been to Iraq. And yet, we weren't content with going after Osama in the mountains of Afghanistan. The government always intended we now know it's documented that from the very first day after 9/11, 9/12, the White House was already looking for reasons to invade Iraq. And if they had to make up the reasons, so be it. We all remember the famous scene, Colin Powell at the UN holding up the vial of what he said was a biological agent that could kill all of New York City that Saddam Hussein was working on. We searched for years for those weapons of mass destruction, never found it. It was a lie. And it was we scapegoated Saddam, we scapegoated Iraq, made up a lie. The American people were thirsty for revenge after 9/11, went along with it. The world went, it was a psyop on the whole world, really. And what was the outcome? They got the war they wanted. They got the war. We're presently involved in another war, indirectly by proxy in Ukraine. I'm telling you, it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. And it hasn't. The other thing that was mentioned yesterday in one of the comments was that I'm making this political. Well, if that is so, then I apologize. I'm certainly not trying to make anything political. I think I've been equally harsh towards both Republicans and Democrats. The whole purpose of this channel is to defend JFK And I'm fighting for the truth about the JFK killing, assassination. He's a Democrat. I've talked about uh, Bobby's killing. He's a Democrat. Martin Luther King was a Democrat. Uh, the uh, who was the other assassin? Just blank. I just went blank for a second. Martin Luther King, Bobby, JFK. Oh, Malcolm X. Uh, you know, and we're going to talk about LBJ, and I'm going to explain his involvement in this. And people like to diminish LBJ's role in this. It cannot be diminished. It cannot be diminished. Not if you're going to examine the evidence. If your emotions come into it, if your politics come into it, maybe you'll make the case that it's overblown. There's no diminishing the role of LBJ in this. He's a Democrat. So there I'm taking, I'm fighting for Democrats, and I'm also exposing a Democrat. But the same is true of Republicans. Spent a lot of time talking about Richard Nixon. He was a Republican. I just talked about the Iraq War. That was a Republican administration. You know what? I've noticed it doesn't matter. Once you get to Washington, the party doesn't matter anymore. We're going to talk tomorrow about the deep state. What happens is they get to Washington, and party, that's for us. That's for the voters to argue over. That's all diversion and distraction, and that's engineered and whipped up during election seasons to get us on our teams, voting for our people. Once you get to Washington, there's only one team. There's only one team. Whether it's a Republican or Democrat, we just mentioned the releasing of the documents. Trump in 2016 said he's going to release all the documents. And then the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, comes and talks to him, and he changes his mind. It was a terrible decision on his part, a weak decision on his part. But then Biden did the same thing. It doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. You're a congressman, you're a senator, you're a president. The deep state gets its hooks in you, and they basically tell you what you're going to decide, what you're going to do. And you're moved around the chessboard like a pawn. You're a piece, and you're moved around. So I wanted to start off by clarifying, I'm not anti-government at all. At all. We need government. We need good government. We need government that tells us the truth. That's all. I don't think that's too much to ask. Number two, this is apolitical. I'm not taking sides in this. I'm like Calvin Coolidge, who used to say a Republican. No, it wasn't Calvin Coolidge. It was the president who served 2 non-consecutive terms. It'll come to me in a minute. It's early in the morning. But anyway, he said a Republican thief is just as bad as a Democrat thief. And, that was during the Gilded Age when politics was crooked and everybody had their hand in the till, taking bribes and things. But the point is the same. A corrupted Republican politician is just as bad as a corrupted Democrat politician. There's no distinction. There's no difference. So this is not political. It's apolitical. And so I'm not anti-government. I'm not trying to be political. PSYOPs are not something of the past. That's the third point I want you. Why would the government that has had so much success lying to us in the past, the 60s and 70s, and 80s, 90s, why all of a sudden would they quit? I mean, you have to be naive. You have your head, intentionally have your head in the sand to think that same government wouldn't continue to run the same PSYOPs against its own people that has been so wildly successful in the 4 or 5 previous decades. It continues. And that's the point of this. Abe Lincoln, I think, used to say, those ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. Let's learn our history. Let's confront the boogeyman in our past, the skeletons in our closet, so that we don't repeat it, so that we are not the dupes. I've had people say to me, man, I feel like such a dupe. I was alive in the 60s and 70s. I believe, well, I don't characterize you that way. I don't characterize myself that way. We didn't know what we didn't know, but we are learning. And so the challenge is to not be duped again, you know? So that's my little sermon to start today. This is all in a search for the truth, and I'm not real concerned about what political party comes out looking bad. I think they both do. I'm not real concerned about offending the government. The government has done enough to deserve to be offended. At least we should be offended at what it's done to us, and in our name lied repeatedly, not trusting us to be able to handle the truth. So that's all. We're just trying to find the truth here, and and let it just lead us to a conclusion and maybe change our destiny a little bit. Today's question is, if JFK was killed as a result of conspiracy, wouldn't someone have talked by now? Uh, we're getting into the actual conspirators, and I always set the table by first talking about how we got to the idea of a conspiracy to begin with, because it came from some very influential parties. It didn't just fall out of the sky. There were some folks who weren't convinced early on about what the story they were being told about the JFK assassination, and they sensed that there was more to the story. And of course, the CIA was really quick and really eager, so was the FBI, to shut that down, which is why they came up with the term conspiracy theorist, which is why they used ridicule. Ridicule is a very strong tool to use against people who are trying to achieve something. It's one thing if people oppose you, you know, on principle. But when you become a punchline, when you in a joke, when you become the object of ridicule, you're beneath even worth opposing anymore, because you're not even worth their time anymore. You're a joke. You're a joke. Um, it's used in campaigns, for example. Uh, One of my students brought in a video. We were just talking about the 2016 election. It was a montage of all the different media personalities, Hollywood personalities, and comedians and politicians who made a joke of Donald Trump and his run for presidency, laughing at him, calling him a joke, and daggum if he didn't win. It's one of the few times someone overcame that. It's kind of a miracle. But that was a very effective tool to use against a candidate. It's also a very effective tool to use against people like us searching for truth. Uh, those who aren't searching, are content with the lie, aren't willing to work and dig and incur the wrath and the resistance and whatever else, use dismissive tactics such as ridicule. Here you see in a couple cartoons, the top cartoon, JFK conspiracy theories, and they've got all these names. And of course, it's not, if you just included legitimate aspects of different conspiracy theories, people would give it more, they give it more credence. But they throw in things like Area 51, Elvis, UFOs, uh, moon landing, zombies. That's thrown in with a few legitimate names like Jimmy Hoffa, Grassy Knoll. They got, Dallas, Book Depository, Second Shoot. All right. So what they do is it's a very clever tactic. They mix in the ridiculous, the preposterous, the stupid, and it smears everything. This is why disinformation is such an effective tactic in this case in particular. If the government can sponsor a writer to go out and lay out some evidence that conspiracy theorists jump on, you got to be real careful what evidence you jump on, because if it's disinformation, it was intended to smear the entire movement. You know, the government isn't stupid. The FBI was doing this, CIA also, back in the 60s and 70s with the hippies, and the anti-war protesters, trying to smear the whole movement because they were, you know, You can't assassinate all the hippies like they did Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, JFK, and Malcolm X, the guys who were individually opposed to the war. There's thousands and millions of hippies out there. My parents were included in that group who were opposed to the war, protested the war, took to the streets, grew their hair long, probably smoked a little dope, probably smoked a lot of dope, listened to the crazy music. And so not too long, you find out later the government infiltrated those groups and tried to get them to commit crimes, tried to portray them to the American people. Again, another psyop, another lie. Why? To protect the outcome that they wanted, which was the war. So it's a psyop. Use ridicule to get Americans to laugh at these conspiracy theorists. Why? To protect the outcome. What's the outcome? The lone gunman theory, the Warren report. The middle cartoon has people sitting on a porch, and all these old people are sitting around. They got a nurse, so it's supposed to convey an image of old people, and they've kind of lost their minds. And one of them is saying the CIA did it. Somebody else is saying LBJ did it. And somebody else is saying the mob did it. The Cubans did it. The Dallas Junior League. There's that ridicule again. There's that ridiculous, preposterous. The Dallas Junior League did it. Obama did it. I mean, so all of this is designed to undermine legitimate efforts of legitimate researchers, people who are just interested in the truth. They're not trying to smear the government. They're not anti-government. But whenever that comes up, I don't even respond to it. And I responded to it today in a general form. But when I get comments and somebody says, well, you're anti-government, or you're making it political, or you're running a psyop on me or us, yourself. If that were true, I'm running the worst psyop in the history of psyops, because you're not supposed to know I'm doing it. I mean, I'm explaining what a psyop is. And, when people make those accusations, I don't respond to it anymore, because it's proof. They're proving my point. It's easier to be lied to than it is to admit you've been lied to. It's easier to accept a lie than to admit that you've been lied to. You're basically proving my point. And you're resorting to name calling, you're resorting to smears, you're resorting to characterizations, you're making assumptions. You're characterizing me and you don't even know me. So I'm not speaking about me in particular, just in general, when people say these things to folks who are searching for the truth, they've lost the argument. And that's all they have left. So just smile and nod and move on. Here you see a graph, and I've showed you this graph several times in different forms, but you can see the high water mark for Americans who believe that one man killed JFK was 33%. And it's generally been about 60-30. And there have been times where it was 80-20. But last time these graphs were compiled was the 2014-13 area, and it was about 60-30. I would imagine that it's even a bigger disparity now, because of what we've learned about the government and the lies that it intentionally told us. It's documented in 2019, 2021, 22. I mean, intentional lies that they knew, but did it anyway to protect policies and outcomes. So, I would imagine that that disparity, that graph would even be show a larger disparity today. To my question, as I started today, if there was a conspiracy, somebody would have taught. How many times have we heard that? I mean, to me, my dad said it to me. So, but I've listed here, and these are just a sampling. Again, please don't comment and tell me, hey, you missed this guy, you missed that guy. I know. I just don't have time to go through everybody. These are just some of the names that we've discussed in this series who came forward with evidence that was inconvenient to the narrative. I got two more slides of names. So this isn't a full list here. Richard Case Nagel, he actually went in and got himself arrested, shot up a bank, and told his story. And that was before the assassination. And I didn't believe. Rose Sheremy predicted the assassination, but because she's a prostitute, they smeared her and they didn't listen to her. She said it was She predicted it before it happened. Aquila Clemens, you remember at the J.D. Tippit, standing right there, saw what she saw, gave her statement, was threatened by 2 Dallas police officers. Don't ever tell what you know. And so she didn't. Roger Craig, we've documented his story. Oswald was prepared to talk. They had to take him out. They knew he was going to talk. He said, "I'm just a patsy." And if there had been a trial, well, I would have loved to. That would have been the mother of all trial, the father of all trials, whatever characterization you want to put on it. Because boy, the story he could have told. Wow, they had to take him out. Paul Grudy, the funeral home. He told the story of how they got the fingerprints on Oswald. Julianne Mercy. I saw Jack Ruby. I saw him. He was parked on the curb at the Dealey Plaza the day before the assassination. A guy got out and took a rifle up the grassy knoll from his truck. We looked at each other full in the face. I saw him. They changed her statement. Seth Cantor. I saw Jack Ruby at the hospital. We had a 5-minute conversation in the stairwell. George Applin. I saw Jack Ruby at the Texas Theater. I saw him. Billy Grammer said, he was a Dallas police officer. I had a conversation with Jack Ruby, a long conversation with him. And then 5 minutes after, I get an anonymous phone call telling me that Oswald's going to be killed tomorrow when we transport him. And I recognized the voice clearly. It was Jack Ruby. And when I asked him, "Jack, is this you?" He hung up the phone. These people are telling their stories. John Currington, another, you just go through this list. John Currington tells the story about how he was basically the liaison between the Dallas mob and Ruby, and ordered Ruby to do the killing. And he knows both sides of the story because he was the liaison. He was in the middle. He told the story about giving the order, how he was told to pass the order along to Ruby. Dorothy Kilgallen, killed right before her book comes out and her notes stolen. Jack Ruby, given a second trial, promising to talk at the second trial, dies of cancer mysteriously 28 days after he contracts the illness. Elena Guerrero, that's a name we haven't really mentioned. She was a reporter down in Mexico City who saw Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City. According to her testimony, she saw him there before the end of September meeting when the Warren Commission said he went down there. This means he was, according to Elena Guerrero and her sister, who also saw, that means Oswald was down there prior to when they said he went down there that one time, and that she was actually at a party with him there when it was introduced to him. And boy, they shut her up right quick, because it didn't fit the narrative. The story didn't fit the narrative. The Odio sisters, we talked to somebody pretending to be Oswald, but that didn't work. That didn't fly because the Warren Commission said no. At the same time, he was on a bus going to Mexico, so they shut the Odio sisters up. Abraham Bolden had a story to tell. He did tell a story, got put in prison for it. We'll tell that story later. Hale Boggs, one of the Warren commissioners who expressed his disagreement with the single bullet theory, with the idea that Oswald acted alone with didn't agree with the conclusions, kind of got bullied into signing it, disappears in a plane accident over Alaska, never to be heard of again before he can. He had just come out and sort of gone to war with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Basically called him. He said, "You're worse than the dictators that we overthrew or we took care of in Europe in the 40s. You're resorting to Stalinist tactics, and you're running a secret police there, and basically." Declared war on J. Edgar Hoover and disappeared within weeks of that statement. David Ferrie, he's going to be the star witness in the Clay Shaw trial. You can't say people didn't talk. You can't say people didn't try to talk. Here's some more. Judith Berry Baker, she's told her story, and people have assassinated her character and used ridicule, a very common tactic used against inconvenient females witnesses to diminish them intellectually, to say that they have substance abuse problems or relationship issues or this issue or that, and turn them into crazy women. James Files, well, he was a felon, so you can't believe him. He makes up stuff. My goodness, so many parts of his story check out. So we just throw the baby out with the bathwater and we say, but these people all have important stories to tell. Dorothy Hunt was on her way. She was on her way to Chicago to give a press conference to talk about Watergate and the connections to the JFK assassination. And her plane goes down. Richard Nixon, I included him because somebody made a fabulous point. It was one of you who made a comment. Richard Nixon technically was one of the first JFK researchers. And, his words on the tapes, which got glossed over in the here and now of the Watergate scandal, but boy, in the context of the overall and JFK research, his words became like North Stars to determining the players in the plot to kill the president. And, if you think about the potential, if he hadn't been bullied into resigning, if there had been a trial, the story he could have told, yeah, it would have burned a lot of people's house down, might have burned Washington down to the ground, but it might have also got to the bottom of a lot of lies. I don't know if he would have talked, honestly. He's not the type to talk, but he said so much in those tapes that if a proper investigation had been undertaken at that point, I mean, it did lead to the church hearings and it did lead to the House Select Committee, but even they were compromised, as we found out later. Richard Nixon was speaking in the first person. He knew about all this hanky panky because he'd been involved in it. You talk about a potential witness there who got diminished as a bad guy, as a boogeyman. So, maybe he did talk because we have his words on the tape. Now, whether or not he would have said it in open court, I don't know. But we do have recordings of his words. William Pauley, Charles Nicoletti, George DeMarch, these guys were all being called to the House Select Committee, about to give their story. William Sullivan, John Paisley, Rosselli ends up cut up in a chopped up, in a oil drum in Dumbfounding Bay down in Miami. He had already testified to the House Select Committee 3 times, and he was being recalled in 76, go back for his 4th time. So he had already talked. Sam Giancana was about ready to go testify. He gets shot in the face, in the mouth. Santos Trafficante testified. Frank Regano wrote a book. Jimmy Hoffa. The reason he was killed was because he was threatening to go public in order to get control back of the Teamsters union. He felt like the only way the only leverage he had left was the knowledge that he had. He disappears. David Atlee Phillips, before he dies, says, I was Oswald's handler. Oswald was CIA. Oswald was never in Mexico City. Now, I believe he was, but for the purposes of the CIA and what they wanted him there for, Atlee Phillips said he was never there. The whole Mexico City story was a concoction. And of course, David Atlee Phillips would be in a position to know because he was in charge of the CIA disinformation. That was his job. And he was also the Mexico City station chief. Frank Sturgis testified. Tosh Plumley testified. Marita Lorenz testified and was so credible a witness, got the only court case that's ever been brought, civil or criminal, to acknowledge that the CIA was involved and that E. Howard Hunt was involved. The Parkland doctors, they came out with their statements and said what they said, and then got bullied into changing their stories later, some of them. But they did talk. They were trying to talk. E. Howard Hunt finally did talk right before he died. You can't say people didn't talk. How about Ralph Leon Yates, the guy who, saw Oswald or the Oswald doppelganger and reported it later? Wayne January, the guy at the Redbird Airfield who had a conversation with people who were trying to rent an airplane. He saw Oswald sitting in a car. Warren Butch Burroughs, the guy who sold Oswald popcorn at Texas Theater. His his testimony became a problem for the timeline. Bernard Hare, excuse me, the guy who saw uh, Jack Ruby at the Texas Theater. T.F. White, the guy who saw uh, Oswald in the doppelganger in the little red car across from the mechanic shop. And he told Wes Wise about it. Wes Wise researched it and found out who the car belonged to. You know, all these Robert G. Vincent, the guy who ends up on the airplane with the Oswald doppelganger, and they fly into Dallas, and they pick up the Oswald doppelganger that tells his story. Jack Martin. That's really how Jim Garrison got started on his case in New Orleans. You go back and trace it back, because what Jack Martin reported about what had gone on the summer of '63 at the Guy Bannister building, at the Newman building. And Delphine Roberts was the secretary for Guy Bannister. She said, Guy Bannister told me, don't worry about Oswald leafleting pro-Castro leaflets. He's with us. And they all laughed about it as he was being sheep-dipped. The point in all of this is, and I didn't have time to go through each one and retell their story. I've already told their story. But you understand the point. The point is, when people say, oh, if it was a conspiracy, people would have talked. If it was a conspiracy, somebody would have said something. They were at least tried to. People did. Go back through that list that we just shared and look at how many of these people were shut up, were bullied, intimidated, were killed, were threatened, were diminished by ridicule, character was assassinated. Bad things happen to all these people. Why? What's the common thread? What's the common theme? What's the common denominator? It's that they all had a story to tell that was in some manner, shape, form harmful to the narrative. So that doesn't wash anymore, this idea that people would have talked, but they didn't, because they did. They tried. I always, when I'm speaking to my class about conspiracy, and in this case specific with the JFK, I always read them this quote, which comes from a book called A Coffin for Demetrios by Eric Ambler in 1939. So this is going back. This has nothing to do. I mean, he wasn't writing about the JFK assassination, obviously, but it explains the importance of not getting waylaid by the diversion, but finding out who is Geppetto, who's behind the scenes pulling everybody's strings. And there's this little interchange I think is really instructive to us today. The colonel laughed unpleasantly, and he says, quote, my dear friend Demetrios would have nothing to do with the actual shooting. No, his kind never risk their skins like that. They stay on the fringe of the plot. They are the professionals, the entrepreneurs, the links between the businessmen, the politicians who desire the end but are afraid of the means. Oh, that's a really important statement. The politicians who desire the end but are afraid of the means. And the fanatics, the idealists who are prepared to die for their convictions. The important thing to know about an assassination or an attempted assassination is not who fired the shot, but who paid for the bullet. That's, and this is why PSYOPs are so effective, because if you're not careful, you get caught up in the diversion. You get caught up in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That's a diversion. You get caught up in Lee Harvey Oswald. He's a diversion. You get caught up in the shooter on the grassy knoll. These are all diversions, okay? What's really important is to find out who's the shadows, who's in the shadows behind all that. And of course, it helps if you can identify who the shooters were on what particular building, and because they all have ties to people. And for example, if you decide to believe that James Files was the shooter on the grassy knoll, that's Chicago. That's the Chicago mob. Okay, so that he is a tie to the mob. The only reason he would be there is because of the Chicago mob. If Lee Harvey Oswald is in any way, shape, or form involved in the assassination or being used as the patsy, that's the CIA, because he was a CIA asset. If there are breakdowns in Secret Service protection, that's the Secret Service. You know, you look at the driver, you look at the guy in the front right seat, they didn't do their jobs. You look at people that are flashing Secret Service badges, that's the Secret Service. Okay, those are tied. So yes, it does help tie you in to the larger institution. That's the importance of it. But don't get so caught up in Lee Harvey Oswald or who fired the shot, the fatal shot. It's who was behind these people that really matters. And that's the point that Ambler's trying to make. And that's what we're going to be seeking to do as we proceed from here on out, is explain the backstories and who was behind the assassination plot. You could make an argument that the JFK assassination was predicted. It was prophesied. On the same day, October 2, 1963, exactly 30 days before the original plot to kill him in Chicago, Richard Starnes, who's an editor and a reporter with the Washington Daily News, wrote a column on the same day as another writer wrote a column for a different news organization. We'll get to them in just a second. On the same day. And they basically say the same thing, which leads me to believe that they had been in communication with each other, and they are trying to warn the powers that be. They are trying to warn the American people, hey, listen, something's up. Something's up. On October 2, 1963, Richard Starnes says, quote, the CIA has arrogantly rejected orders from President Kennedy about ending the war in Vietnam. Now, we haven't talked about Vietnam yet. We're fixing to. We've already seen that the CIA has completely ignored Kennedy's orders about Cuba and about assassination plots and about sabotage. He's tried to shut down Operation Mongoose. They continued. William Harvey continued to run his little assassination stuff. He had to actually arrest E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. In other words, the CIA was just completely ignoring him with respect to Cuba. We've talked about that. What he is saying is they're also ignoring him with respect to Vietnam. If an attempted military coup against Kennedy takes place, it will be organized by the CIA. Kennedy is reluctant to confront the agency head on because he's afraid that they will kill him if he tries. That was October 2, 1963. Same day, Arthur Kroc writes for the New York Times. These are not Liberty Lobby writers here. This is not some far right or far left extremist who's bomb throwing here. These are, the New York Times is the newspaper of record. All right. The Washington Daily News, everybody read that newspaper in DC. On the same day, Arthur Kroc says, quote, if the United States ever experiences an attempt at a coup to overthrow the government, it will come from the CIA. The agency represents a tremendous power and total unaccountability to anyone. Okay, so we've been warned. These aren't the only ones, by the way. There are others, not as dramatic, but other people who started to know. William Fulbright, for example, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, very alarmed about what he was saying. All right, so I told you at this outset of today, I would kind of get into who was kind of the first conspiracy theorist. According to David Talbot has written, I talked about him yesterday, he's written 2 fantastic books, absolutely fantastic. One's called Brothers. I've got a picture of it there. The other is The Devil's Chessboard, which goes into the Dulles brothers and into the CIA and all that. We'll get into that tomorrow with the deep state. But David Talbot in Brothers says, quote, Kennedy was America's first assassination conspiracy theorist. He's the first. And of course, he has a pretty strong motive. It's his brother. Soon after the arrest of Oswald, Kennedy gets a phone call. We've talked about this from J. Edgar Hoover. And Hoover tells him that based on the arrest of Oswald, that he believes that Cuba's communist government was behind the assassination. And he tells Bobby on the phone call that Oswald had, quote, shuttled in and out of Cuba, which, of course, Bobby knew wasn't true. The only time Oswald had even tried to go to Cuba was in late September, allegedly, when he tried to enter Cuba through Mexico, the whole Mexico City saga that we talked about. But here is Hoover telling Bobby, oh no, this guy's been back and forth to Cuba many times. He's been in and out. And if he did the assassination, then Cuba had to be behind it. Now, Bobby knows way more than Hoover realizes he knows. We've already established the fact, it's documented, that Oswald was an FBI informant for Bobby Kennedy. That was one of the conditions when he came back from Russia. We're going to let you back in, but you're going to be an informant and tell us what's going on in your agency, the CIA, because they won't tell us anything. They're being ultra secretive. And in exchange for your ability to come back into the United States without any repercussions, you're going to be an informant for the FBI so that we know what's going on in the CIA. So he knows Oswald, and he also knows that there's been a back channel going on between his brother and Fidel Castro right up until the point in time in which during that he was killed, a back channel to normalize relations between the United States and Cuba, to recognize Cuba, to recognize Castro, to recognize Castro's government. Castro would have no motive to want to kill the one guy who can make things happen for Cuba that Fidel ultimately wanted to happen. I don't want to get too far afield here, but Fidel Castro, I don't believe was a communist ever. I don't believe he was. Che Guevara might have been. He was a revolutionary in that sense, but Fidel Castro was a pragmatist. He was trying to find a way to get Cuba money. Cuba was broke, and after he became the leader of Cuba, he reached out to the United States, and we so mishandled that. We so bungled it that we pushed him into the arms of the Soviets because he couldn't get money from us, and then he would get it from somebody. And Cuba became a pawn in the Cold War game between the Soviets and the Americans. We pushed him into the Soviets' arms, but he would have much rather have been dependent on and had good relations with the United States, a country 90 miles from his country, in his hemisphere, than the Soviets. And here he's finally got a partner, a negotiating partner who's negotiating in good faith with him, who might make that happen. Why would he kill him? That's Bobby. He's saying, no, Hoover, you're lying to me. You're telling me all this nonsense about Oswald. You don't realize I know Oswald. I've known about Oswald since he came back from Russia. He's been an informant for me. He's been telling me all the CIA stuff that's been going on. That's how we knew to go down and shut down the Operation Mongoose bases. That's how we knew to go down and arrest Hunt and Sturgis. That's how we knew to seize all their C4 and their weapons and things. That's how we knew they were running operations in Cuba still when we told them to stop. How do we know all this? We knew it because of our FBI informant named Lee Harvey Oswald. And he's not been to Cuba. I know where he's been. I know that the CIA made up that story about Mexico City. I know that's what you want me to believe, but I know he hasn't been there. So immediately, and then of course, this is the famous phone call. J. Edgar Hoover tells him that Oswald acted alone. He was a lone gunman. He knows none of that's true. He's being lied to by J. Edgar Hoover. And he assumes he's lying to him, not because the FBI killed him. He's trying to cover up the FBI's role in it. He's being lied to because he's trying to cover up the CIA's role in it. and he knows the CIA is involved in it. And as evidence that we know that he knows is his first phone call. After he gets off the phone with J. Edgar Hoover, he contacts John McCone, who's director of the CIA. I have him pictured here, standing next to JFK as he's being sworn in as director. And he tells him, "Come over to my house. I got to talk to you." And right there, he confronts McCone. He says, "I want to know if your guys did this." And of course, McCone denies it. McCone was a placeholder. That's all he was as far as CIA director. You're going from Alan Dulles, and he's going to be replaced ultimately by Richard Helms. You know, Alan Dulles and Richard Helms are cut from the same cloth. McCone was the placeholder in between, who was left out of the loop. He was kind of an outsider who was in charge of the CIA temporarily. He was kind of like the FBI director after J. Edgar Hoover, a placeholder until you can find somebody who's a suitable replacement who will fill the shoes of the guy that's gone. And so John McCone didn't know what he didn't know. So I think he was telling the truth. And as far as the truth as he knew it, when he told Bobby, no, the CIA didn't have anything to do with it, Bobby didn't believe him. Bobby clearly didn't believe him, as evidenced by some of the statements he and his staffers made afterwards. But anyway, the first phone call after he gets off the phone with J. Edgar Hoover, and J. Edgar Hoover spews all that nonsense to Bobby. Bobby gets on the phone, tells McCone, "I want you to come over to my place, and we got to have a heart to heart." So that indicates right off the bat the number one culprit in Bobby's mind. The number two culprit is evidenced by what he does next. He phones Julius Drosnin in Chicago, who was his contact. Bobby has long ties to mafia corruption. He was part of the McClellan Committee back in the late 50s, was looking into Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcello, Santos Trafficante, Jimmy Hoffa, and he had contacts in that world whom he still talked with. And one of them was Julius Drosnin. He was an expert in union corruption, which, of course, the Teamsters Union was basically in bed with the mob. And so if you're examining union corruption, you're at the same time examining organized crime. They're two heads of the same coin, in Chicago especially. And he asks Julius, he says, "I want you to look into whether the mafia was involved in this, specifically Sam Giancana." He had access to FBI wiretaps, during which Giancana was heard saying, talking about JFK, quote, "We need help on this. Maybe you can open some doors with the mob. Anything you pick up, let me know directly." And this is Kennedy talking to Julius, and he's saying, we need help on this. Find out what Sam knows or what he did. We've heard on FBI wiretaps that he was making threats against the president. He's been furious with the White House for double crossing on the deal to win the election in 60. We know all that. So find out what he knows. And so he tells Julius, he says, "We need help on this. Maybe you can open some doors with the mob. Anything you pick up, let me know directly." So that's his second. He's made two phone calls. He's called the CIA director, confronted him directly face to face. Now he's called his contact in Chicago who can look into organized crime and or the organized labor, i.e. that means Jimmy Hoffa. And then the third conversation that he has is with Enrique Harry Ruiz Williams, who is a Bay of Pigs veteran. This is one of the guys that went to Bay of Pigs. He's one of Bobby Kennedy's most trusted associates in the Cuban exile community. This is one of the things that Bobby was good at. He would get people inside who were access points. They were sources, and he would rely on these people, and he came to trust them. This is the guy he trusted, who was inside the Cuban exile community. And Kennedy, in a phone conversation, told him, quote, one of your guys did it. The journalist Haynes Johnson, who was with Ruiz Williams at the time that he had this conversation with Bobby, said, quote, Harry stood there with the phone in his hand, and then he told me what Bobby said. It was a shocking thing. I'll never forget. Harry got this look on his face. After he hung up, Harry told me what Bobby had said. This is why the author that we referenced, who wrote Brothers, Talbot, said that Bobby Kennedy was our first conspiracy theorist when it comes to assassination. He's putting the pieces together in his mind. He's the attorney general. So he's in charge of the law enforcement infrastructure of the United States. So he would be in a position to know. He has an FBI informant inside who's been reporting to him about the CIA. So his first phone call is to the CIA. His second phone call is to the mob and his contact inside the Chicago mob specifically. And he has, as far as his credentials and looking into the mob, they're well established because of his McClellan hearings, that he was a participant in the late 50s. So this is not his first rodeo, his first dance when it comes to organized crime or organized labor. And then his third contact is the Cuban exile community and his contact inside that. And he knows, obviously, if Oswald has been reporting to him about CIA activities, then he knows about Alpha 66. Well, Alpha 66 is all the anti-Castro Cubans who were ostensibly put together by the CIA to at first assassinate Castro, but later turned and to assassinate Kennedy. He knows all this. This is one of the reasons why many people surmise Kennedy went into such a funk after the assassination, because he realizes as he puts these pieces together, he was in a position, probably he and he alone was in a position to prevent the assassination if he'd put these pieces together sooner. And that he could have saved his brother's life. And perhaps it was his actions or inaction that cost his brother his life. There's a lot of guilt there that Bobby felt after the assassination of his brother. When, according to David Talbot, quote, when Bobby Kennedy told his comrade in arms, Harry Ruiz Williams, the guy we were just speaking about, one of your guys did it, he might as well have been saying one of our guys did it, or even one of my guys did it. Bobby was saying that his brother had been killed by someone in his own anti-Castro operation. We're going to learn about this. After Bay of Pigs, the Kennedy brothers doubled down. They lied to Khrushchev. They said Operation 40 was going to be shut down. All they did was change the name to Operation Mongoose, and they doubled down, and he put Bobby in charge. And he says, come hell or high water, we're going to get rid of Castro. That was the promise we made, and we're going to honor that promise. Now, it changes after the Cuban Missile Crisis. But from Bay of Pigs to Cuban Missile Crisis, Bobby is in charge of this anti-Castro operation. And he now realizes that anti-Castro operation, which he was in charge of, has killed his own brother. According to Evan Thomas, who later wrote a biography about Bobby Kennedy, Kennedy had developed a, quote, private bond with Williams, claiming that Kennedy told him that Williams was, quote, very brave and had very good judgment. So when he shared this with Ruiz Williams, he was sharing it with a friend in confidence. According to former FBI agent William Turner, quote, Harry Williams was a Kennedy kind of man, tough, liberal, and ferociously anti-communist. Turner also confirmed that in 1963, the CIA, quote, was running a kind of program against Castro, and that, quote, Harry Williams would drop by whenever he was in Washington to meet with CIA agents. So here you see a connecting tissue here between these anti-Castroites, i.e. Alpha 66 and the CIA. They're all in bed together. And what we're going to find out later is the mob's in there with them as well. So Kennedy my goodness, if you follow through and extrapolate out what Kennedy did in the hours after the assassination, it's taken us 60 years as JFK researchers to learn what Kennedy knew in the moments after the assassination. Unfortunately, he never became president. You know, one of his priorities was going to be to reopen the investigation into his brother's death. Imagine if the president of the United States, with all the knowledge that Bobby had, is involved in that investigation, what truth that they would come up with. You know, but he died. That he himself died. You know, here's another case of someone who would have talked, who was biding his time until he became president, would have talked, but couldn't, never got the chance. In the weeks after Dallas, Kennedy pretty much put together the whole plot. He knew the names, he knew the players, he knew the institutions, he knew the cover-ups, he knew everything. And he told his family that. I heard Bobby Kennedy, which is his son, recently speaking to this, and basically said so in so many words, you know, my dad knew because he told us. And, you know, you listen to Bobby Kennedy Jr. talk about his father's assassination, his uncle's assassination, and there's a level of knowing there. There's a level of knowledge there that speaks to someone who had a conversation or listened in as someone who really knew, told him the story. And that was his dad. And of course, then his dad ends up dead. And then you extrapolate that forward to today. Bobby has been denied 3 different times by the Biden administration Secret Service protection as he runs for president, when he has 2 family members that have been killed by his own government. My goodness, you just can't make this stuff up. You can't make it up. So Kennedy assembles his family together and he tells them, but he explains to them he cannot go public with what he knows because it implicates him and it implicates his brother. It would damage the reputation of both of them and make it impossible for himself or his younger brother, Teddy, to ever run for president. Because the truth is that JFK was assassinated by a group of people, something that had been put in motion by the Kennedys themselves to assassinate Castro. And when the infrastructure of that was turned, the target was changed, and the assassination happened instead to JFK, and Bobby figured out who did it. He realized, these are my people. And indirect, it's kind of like Nixon realizing the S-Force. These are my people. These guys that just got arrested at Watergate, these are the same people that assassinated. I put that together. I put that S-Force together. It's going to come back on me. We got to cover this up. Bobby's doing the same thing. Bobby had to cover this up and not let it go public because it would implicate him and his brother and ruin his political fortune, but also Teddy's and the Kennedy family in general. David Talbot says, quote, in true Kennedy fashion, he wanted to control any investigation of the crime, not only to ensure its authenticity, but to prevent any damage to his brother's legacy and his own political future. Bobby knew that if the Kennedy administration's secret war against Castro, a war that he was supposed to be overseeing, was revealed as the source of the plot against his own brother, the family's image could be badly tarnished. An argument could be made that even if Bobby had become president and launched his own investigation, it would have been just as flawed for almost the same reasons as previous investigations, because he would have been trying to control it to save himself and his brother. Just like Allen Dulles controlled it in 1964 to protect his agency. Just like in the House Select Committee years, when the CIA again sent George Joanides into rat fuck, the investigation to protect the original narrative, or at least the CIA, And if they're going to conclude conspiracy, at least be in a position to shape who the conspirators were, i.e., the mob, the Cubans, and Lee Harvey Oswald. All of these people who run these investigations have motives, and they run these investigations, and they tell the American people is to get to the bottom of it, but it's really to control it so that they get to determine what the story is. So if Bobby had run an investigation, he would have told us the story. We'd learn more, but it would have protected himself and his brother. So you can't, you really, when you have these investigations, these commissions, you really need neutral third parties that don't have any dogs in this fight. Bobby had a dog in this fight. Nixon had a dog in this fight. Allen Dulles had a dog in this fight. The CIA had a dog in this fight. J. Edgar Hoover had a dog in this fight. And so they inject Gerald Ford to leak to the FBI and the Warren Commission. They put Allen Dulles to control and protect the CIA and the Warren Commission. They inject George Joannides to protect the CIA and the House Select Committee. I mean, all these investigations, all these commissions are contaminated right from the get-go by who's running them. And the same thing would have been true if Bobby Kennedy had run his own investigation. He was already thinking ahead. How do I protect the legacy of my brother? How do I protect the political career of myself and my younger brother? A few quotes here as in the aftermath of the assassination to show that Bobby wasn't the only one. Jackie Kennedy, when they asked her to change her dress before she went and was photographed as LBJ was sworn in, said, no, let them see what they have done. Of course, she had blood all over the front of her pink suit, but she used the pronoun they. Kenneth O'Donnell, JFK's chief of staff, told Bobby when he was reporting back what happened in Dallas, he said, quote, they were caught in a crossfire. It was a conspiracy. He's the first one to use the word crossfire. Crossfire just simply means the bullets were coming from different directions, which means multiple teams of assassins, multiple shooters, multiple guns. It was a conspiracy. John McCone, the CIA director, to Bobby, acknowledged that there had to have been at least two shooters. It wasn't us, but there had to be two shooters. Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service agent in the JFK's limo, told the Warren Commission in his testimony, quote, there have got to be more than three shots, gentlemen. A flurry of shells flew into the vehicle. Well, he would know. He was in the limo. Kellerman later told his wife, quote, there was a conspiracy. James Rowley, chief of the Secret Service, told Bobby, quote, your brother was cut down, again, that same word, in a crossfire by three, perhaps four gunmen. He was the victim of a powerful organization, an organized plot more powerful than the presidency itself. We're going to get into that tomorrow when we start talking about the deep state. But that's James Rowley, chief of the Secret Service. You know, it's interesting what James Rowley said publicly versus what he told Bobby privately. Dr. Berkeley, who is JFK's personal physician, told Henry Hurt, a JFK assassination researcher in 1982, quote, JFK was the target of a conspiracy. We've learned already Bobby Kennedy's three suspects, and he began with the CIA. That was a starting point. But on that same day, he made two other phone calls to his mob contacts in Chicago and to his friend Harry Ruiz, who was his Cuban exile contact. And he believed, and these are the words of that same author who said, quote, Bobby believed it was, quote, a three-headed monster with the CIA on top, flanked by the mafia and Cuban accomplices. We also have a document, a writing that Bobby and Jackie together collaborated on in a letter that they had hand-delivered to Nikita Khrushchev through an intermediary that Bobby trusted. His name is Georgy Bolshakov. This was the back channel that Bobby and JFK had used to settle the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you remember that story, JFK and Bobby, neither one trusted the official channels through going through the State Department or going through any of the official channels of the government to communicate with Khrushchev during his time. And Khrushchev didn't trust his official channels either. Stories were getting changed, and provocations, any slight provocation could result in a nuclear war. So they wanted to communicate as directly as they could. So they used a trusted intermediary. His name is Georgy Bolshakov. Well, this guy's still around. And so Bobby put in his hands a letter to hand deliver to Nikita Khrushchev. And in that letter, it says, quote, "We," and the letter is signed Bobby Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy. "We believe the president was killed by a large political conspiracy. Perhaps there was only one assassin, but he did not act alone." And this was their way of telling Nikita Khrushchev, "We don't think it was you. And we want you to know that." And so in the weeks after the assassination, Georgy Bolshakov delivered that letter on behalf of Bobby and Jackie to Nikita Khrushchev, indicating to Nikita what they thought happened and that they know that he did not do it. And all this subterfuge the CIA is blowing, all this smoke about the Cubans and the Russians and communists and all this kind of stuff, communist was all that. It was a subterfuge. It was a diversion. Ultimately, what I hope to be able to demonstrate as we go forward from this point is that JFK was killed by a force in this country that no matter what the cost, no matter what president you have to kill or how many you have to kill, no matter how many psyops you got to run against the American people, we got this Cold War has to continue. That's the overall. And then, of course, the hot war in Vietnam, which is part and parcel of the Cold War, has to happen. And JFK is going to become an obstacle to both of those endeavors, which means an obstacle to the money spigot, which was flowing. The Cold War was a very profitable enterprise for some of the forces that we're going to be talking about. And the Kennedys, plural, became threats to that, obstacles to that, obstacle to Vietnam happening, obstacle to the Cold War continuing, obstacle to the money spigot. And so they had to be removed. Because in 1964, if they allow the election to proceed, JFK was going to win re-election. If that happens and he replaces LBJ on the ticket with a placeholder, that paves the way for Bobby to run in 1968, which he ultimately did. But he would be succeeding his brother, and then he would possibly serve for 8 years and be succeeded by Teddy in 1976, a Kennedy dynasty. There's only one way to stop that, and that's to kill the head of that. That's JFK. So that's where we're going. I'm laying out sort of a lesson plan or a roadmap to where we want to go, and that's my objective. Now, it's up to you to decide if I meet that objective or not, or I achieve it. But that's what we'll be looking at going forward. All of these 67 episodes to this point have been laying the groundwork for what is to come, which is always the question everybody starts with. My students always ask me, "Well, who did it? Who is?" And I tell them, "Listen, we can't even begin talking about who did it until we tell all of the backstory," which is what these 67 episodes we've covered to this point. That's what that was. That's the backstory. So now we get into the nuts and bolts and all the policy and all of the stuff going on behind the scenes and the different conspirators that are beginning to morph and take shape, and the plot itself, which is will begin to take shape in 1963. So anyway, that's a lot to say, but hope you enjoyed today. This was episode 67. Check out my website, sphistory.com. If you wish to see what other content I provide. Also, uh, feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free, and hit the notification bell and give me a thumbs up. That helps me, or at least lets me know that there's real people out there, not bots, that are actually listening to me. And continue to comment. I love the comments, and I'm learning new stuff every day. We all are, and the interaction is really helpful in that process. So, all right, until next time, tomorrow morning, everybody have a great day. The weather has cleared up. We got a little bit of rain yesterday, but not nearly as much as everybody thought. So we ended up leaving school at 11:30, and the sun came out at 2:30. So, or like 1:30 actually. So looks like a nice day today. A little bit cooler though. So I will speak to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you.